His legacy is certainly underrated in Eagles history, but I'm not yet ready to say that Dallas Goedert is the greatest tight end in franchise history over Zach Ertz. I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Wednesday edition of the show. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. You can find us Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. We are continuing GOAT Week on today's edition of the podcast, going through the number one, the greatest player of all time in franchise history at each position, but not just the number one guy, the top five players at each position after a dominant Super Bowl victory that had so much historic significance, like the Eagles' Super Bowl 59 win did have. We have to revisit all of these individual legacies. We did quarterback on Monday. Make sure you check that out. Is Jalen Hurts now the GOAT over Donovan McNabb, over Nick Foles? Spoiler alert, he absolutely is. I think you all know that one's coming. At wide receiver, has A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, have they caught the likes of Harold Carmichael, Deshaun Jackson all time? What about Saquon Barkley? It was one historic season, but how many more dominant years does he need to catch somebody like LaShawn McCoy at the top of that list? Today, we're going to dive into the tight end position and the top five greatest offensive linemen in Eagles history. That one was tougher because we had to combine tackles, guards, and centers, and there's a lot of really good legendary trench players for the Eagles. So that's what we're going to get into on today's edition of the show. Plus, OTAs are officially underway. The Eagles were inside the NovaCare complex today practicing. New offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo had some interesting things to say to the media, so we'll dive into that later on in the show. But let's start GOAT Week on today's edition of the podcast with the tight end position. Dallas Goedert, as you guys know, I feel like his legacy since 2018 is extremely underrated. And to a degree, it's not all his fault, but I feel like there's been a lot of meat left on the bones of his career, considering the talent that he has. A lot of it's not his fault because of the other weapons that were in front of him, like Zach Ertz early in his career. The injuries, which you can kind of say are his fault, but then after Zach Ertz leaves and he's finally the starting tight end, you've got target monsters like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith that come in. So I do feel like personally his legacy could have been a lot better if he was drafted by another football team, if things went a different way. And then when you look at what he's actually done on the field, I do feel like it's very underrated, the 7-year run that he's been on in Philadelphia, especially in the playoffs. But I'm not ready to say that he's the GOAT over Zach Ertz. I do feel like Zach Ertz is clearly still the greatest tight end in franchise history. And look, if Dallas Goedert ended up getting, after this season, another multi-year contract, or let's say that he has a dominant season this year where he has, I would say, he stays healthy for 15 to 17 games. The majority of the season, he has over 700 to 800 receiving yards, 5 to 10 touchdowns. He's averaging like 14 to 15 yards a reception like he was back in 2021. If he's just a dominant blocking tight end in the screen game, a deep threat like he has been at the peak of his powers, and let's say he has another super clutch playoff run and the Eagles are competing for a Super Bowl yet again, let's say they repeat and he's a huge part of that run, I do think Goedert could get it done this year, where he now has an 8-year sample size of really good play, potentially 3 championship runs, where you could say he's ahead of Zach Ertz. Because, again, when you look at his resume, he has 2 Super Bowl appearances with the Eagles. He helped you win a ring in 2024. He's second all-time in your franchise's history in both playoff receptions and playoff receiving yards, only behind Devontae Smith. So he's number 1 at the position in playoff statistics and yards and receptions, ahead of Zach Ertz, ahead of guys like Brent Celek and even, Chad Lewis, who was a part of those early 2000s playoff runs, Keith Jackson. Like, it's Dallas Goedert. He's number 1 at tight end in playoff yards and receptions. He's one of 5 tight ends ever with multiple playoff runs of at least 16 receptions or more. So Goddard does have a good case. He's heading into year 8 with the Eagles. Zach Ertz played 9 seasons with Philadelphia. If he has 1, 2, 3 more really good years with the Eagles, if he does get that extension, I think he could jump Ertz. But right now, and also, real quick too, Dallas Goedert, the most dynamic, complete tight end the Eagles have ever had. They've never had a guy that can run routes like this, that can block like this, that can run after the catch like this, that can be a deep threat like this. Like Dallas Goedert, in a vacuum, I think is the most complete tight end of all time. But Zach Ertz, with all that being said, making the case for Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz was your go-to weapon for, I would say, 5 to 6 years when the wide receiver position was so inconsistent in Philadelphia. He was the go-to guy for Nick Foles, for Sam Bradford, for Carson Wentz, for Nick Foles again. He helped transition into the Jalen Hurts era of 2021. Like, he was your go-to weapon, and he was so consistent every single year. He was so clutch. He was so good on third downs. He never dropped the football. He was so hard to guard one-on-one. When it comes to like route-running tight ends, Zach Ertz is one of the best separators of all time. Dallas Goedert is to A.J. Brown what Zach Ertz is to Devontae Smith for tight ends. Like, that's Dallas Goedert is just the cyborg built in a lab like A.J. Brown for tight ends. And Zach Ertz is that finesse separating, great hands, possession-like player that Devontae Smith is. Like, that's kind of a perfect comparison, honestly, when I'm thinking about it. Zach Ertz is the Devontae Smith of tight ends. And when you look at the resume, made the 2 biggest plays in Super Bowl 52, that 4th and 1 conversion when you're down 33-32. If he doesn't make that play, they lose the game and they don't win their first ever championship, right? He has the game-winning touchdown in Super Bowl 52. He broke the single-season tight end reception record in 2018. He is 2nd all-time in franchise history in receptions. He's 5th all-time in franchise history in yards. Again, 9 consistent seasons with the Eagles. He was a great leader, both on and off the field. Goddard's close. And again, I think he's the most complete, talented tight end this position has ever seen in Philadelphia. But Zach Ertz, I think, is still the GOAT at tight end for Philadelphia. Who else rounds out the top 5? I think Brent Celek is the clear number 3. It's incredible how much consistency they've had at this position. To go from Brent Celek to Zach Ertz to Dallas Goedert is pretty unbelievable. And Brent Celek he played in Philadelphia for a decade. And because at the end of his career, he was a blocking tight end, he was the 2nd guy behind Zach Ertz for years from, I'd say, really 2013, 2014 up until 2017 for 4 to 5 seasons. Like, he was the number 2 behind Goddard or Ertz. And, he wasn't really an effective receiver at that point. Because of that, people forget, though, Brent Celek from 2009 to 2000, and I'd say like 2013, 2014 when Ertz got drafted, for those first 4 to 5 years of his career, he was a really good receiver, consistently getting you, was he a 1,000-yard receiver a year? No. But 500 to 700 yards a year, like that is what you were getting from Brent Celek. When he was playing with Donovan McNabb and Kevin Cobb and Michael Vick, he was an effective receiving tight end, and it was cool to see him evolve in his career when Zach Ertz emerged and took his job and was clearly a more efficient, superior receiver, and Celek was getting older and lost a lot of his athleticism. To see how good of a blocker he became, almost became like an extra lineman, and the leader that he was, the mentor to Ertz. I think that was really important, and it was really crucial having that kind of locker room guy that had gone through so many different eras of Eagles football. That was a very underrated part of that Super Bowl 52 win, especially when you had so much turmoil with, Carson Wentz getting hurt in that season and Jason Peters and Darren Sproles. Brent Celek, I think, is an underrated player in franchise history. He's number 3. And then I'd put Pete Retzlaff as number 4 and Keith Jackson at number 5. Retzlaff is actually, it's insane to think about it because he played in, the 50s and 60s, but he has still to this day, the 2nd most receiving yards in Eagles history. So for him to do that in an era where they really did not throw the football all that much or that effectively is really incredible. And then Keith Jackson was only in Philadelphia for 4 years, but he was Randall Cunningham's go-to receiver in the 80s, a very talented player. I think he's number 5 over somebody like a Chad Lewis or an LJ Smith. Honorable mention, Trey Burton, just for throwing the Philly special, but I think those are the top 5 Eagles tight ends in franchise history, and I think that's a pretty obvious list. Zach Ertz, number 1. Dallas Goedert, number 2. Brent Celek at 3. Pete Retzlaff at 4. That's your Mount Rushmore, those 4. And then Keith Jackson rounds out the list as number 5. What about the offensive line? This one was a little more difficult because I had to combine tackles, centers, and guards. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And spoiler alert, the GOAT for the offensive line, he's still on the team. We'll talk about it next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The NBA playoffs, they're in full swing. The conference finals, both series are at 3-1. It looks like it's going to be Thunder Pacers, I think, knock on wood, in the NBA finals. Every night has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. I took Knicks' money line yesterday against the Pacers. That didn't work out, but I did hit a 2-leg parlay thanks to the Oilers winning, thanks to the over on Halliburton's points 4. Combine that into a 2-leg parlay. All you got to do is do something just like that. Bet $5 on anything on FanDuel, and if you do that at FanDuel.com, place a $5 bet and it wins, you're going to get $200 back in bonus bets. So hopefully you didn't take my advice yesterday and take the Knicks money line, but you can also bet on player props, parlays, all that and more. Take your favorite team money line, do it at FanDuel.com. Again, $5 bet. If it wins, you're going to get $200 back in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, guys, thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We continue GOAT Week. Who are the best players of all time at each position for the Philadelphia Eagles? So far, if you've been listening to the shows, the 4 GOATs that I've established. At quarterback, Jalen Hurts. At running back, LaShawn McCoy. At wide receiver, it's still Harold Carmichael, although I think A.J. Brown's going to catch him soon. At tight end, it's Zach Ertz. So A.J. Brown's close. Saquon Barkley, I think, is already close to LaShawn McCoy. Devontae Smith, not far behind A.J. Brown and Harold Carmichael. Dallas Goedert, give him another year or two. I think there is a chance that he can catch Zach Ertz as the GOAT. So there's a lot of players on the team right now that either are the GOAT, like Jalen Hurts, or are nipping at the heels of the number 1 guy, or have a really good argument to be that player. Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith. I do think when you look at the Eagles' offensive line, this is the second position for GOAT Week that a current player, I think, is at the top of their position in franchise history. I believe that Lane Johnson, after last year, and I would even make the argument before that, has jumped Jason Kelce as the greatest lineman in franchise history. And I don't think it's that crazy. It's close. It's tough because, I mean, Jason Kelce was insanely good. I mean, it goes without saying. The resume speaks for itself. I think he's the greatest center of all time in NFL history. His 2017 to 2024 run is the greatest a center has ever had. A 6-time first-team All-Pro. Jason Kelce from 2019 to 2023, 5 straight seasons, he was a first-team All-Pro player, an all-time leader, a Super Bowl champion. He was the GOAT for me heading into 2024. But Lane Johnson, when you look at his resume, when you look at the dominant stretch he's had since COVID, it's unbelievable, but this is a real fact. Lane Johnson, for the last 4 years, going on 5 years now, has not allowed a single sack. He went 4 seasons when he's consistently put on an island and doesn't get help from chips, from running backs and tight ends. Like, there are so many times Lane is just one-on-one with some of the best pass rushers in football on the edge. And he's allowed maybe it depends on what statistical platform you ask, but a lot of these platforms say he has not allowed a sack that was his fault in 4 to 5 years. And if he has, if you consider it was his fault on a sack or two, it was just that. It was only like 1 sack or 2. it might be the most dominant individual run. I think it is the most dominant individual run an Eagle has arguably ever had for that long of a stretch. I mean, he's ever since he was drafted third overall in 2013, he's been insanely good. 12 dominant seasons, and he's still going. He's a 5-time All-Pro player. It's insane that it's not more than that. I think he should be a 12-time All-Pro player. He has been, to me, you can make the argument he's been the best tackle in football every single year for, 5 to 6 seasons. I said Jason Kelce is the greatest center of all time. You could make the argument that Lane Johnson, whether, removing the left tackle and right tackle positions, just combining both, you could make the argument Lane Johnson is the greatest tackle in NFL history. He has that kind of resume, a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He's been to 3 Super Bowls. He's been a part of so many different Eagles eras, and he's always been such a consistent part of the solution. He's been an incredible leader on and off the field. He's overcome so much adversity. The mental illness part of this, how he almost hung up the cleats. He almost called it a career multiple times, and for him to bounce back from that and still play, go through all of this, and still play at the level that he has. I think he's one of the most underrated players in NFL history. It makes me so angry even last year seeing a Penei Sewell get named as a first-team All-Pro player ahead of Lane. Lane Johnson has been the best player in his position for almost a decade at this point, if you ask me. And again, the 2020 to 2024 run that Lane's been on, I believe is not only the best individual run an Eagles ever had, or at least it's top 3. It's one of the best runs a player's ever been on in the NFL from just a pure domination standpoint. The fact that this guy, again, considering how many good pass rushers there are and how tough it is for offensive linemen nowadays, with how quarterbacks hold on to the football, how linemen on defense rotate through, considering Lane's age and his injury history, for him to maybe give up 1 or 2 sacks in the last half a decade, if that. Some platforms say he's never given up a sack in that time. It's one of the most unbelievable, impressive runs a feat that a player has ever accomplished. We're going to see that stat in 10 to 20 years, and people are going to be like, no way that's real. That's Lane Johnson. I think he's the GOAT. I'd put him number 1. I'd put Jason Kelce number 2. Jason Peters, to me, is number 3. JP, it's almost because of how good Kelce has become, the legend he's become, the legend that Lane Johnson's become, the legend that Jordan Mailata is becoming. Jason Peters has almost become underrated in Eagles history, and I think it's also because he played for so long, and at the end of his time in Philadelphia, he was always on and off the field. He was banged up. In 2020, people got rubbed the wrong way when I think it was Mailata that went down or Andre Dillard, and Peters was planning on starting at right guard. They moved him over to right guard because Brandon Brooks got injured. When they needed him back at left tackle, he wanted more money to play tackle. I think people were kind of annoyed by that. So because of these factors, I feel like JP has almost been underrated a bit by the Eagles fan base. But when you look at the Jason Peters of 2011 to 2019, that player is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And it's incredible. When you look at the harmony, the consistency the Eagles have had at a position that is so hard to get right, and teams struggle for years to get tackle right. The fact that the Eagles went from Jason Peters to Lane Johnson to Jordan Mailata is unreal. And even before that, Trey Thomas. They went from Trey Thomas started for a decade plus at left tackle. Then it was Jason Peters. You have Lane Johnson at right tackle. Now you've got Jordan Mailata at left tackle. I mean, just talk about an incredible run for one position that, again, is so hard to get right. And the Eagles have just had dominance there. Hall of Fame level play for 20, 25 years at this point. Trey Thomas, by the way, would be number 4 to me. Trey Thomas is a top 10 Eagle of all time in games played, was a top-tier tackle for a decade plus for your most sustained success in franchise history in the early 2000s. Even helped to get to the NFC Championship in 2008 against the Arizona Cardinals. Those are my top 4. My Mount Rushmore for the Eagles offensive line: Lane Johnson, Jason Kelce, Jason Peters, and then Trey Thomas. And then Al Worcester is number 5. Played in the 40s, was a Hall of Fame level player that was a finalist just a few years ago. We'll see if he ends up getting in. He helped you win your first 2 titles ever, repeating in 1948, 1949. Again, as I said yesterday, it's really tough for me to fairly evaluate players from that era. But when you look at the team success that he had, the fact that he likely will be in Canton when it's all said and done, I got to put him in the top 5 as well. So those are my top 5 offensive linemen all time for the Eagles. Lane Johnson is the GOAT. Jason Kelce's number 2. Jason Peters, number 3. Trey Thomas, number 4. And Al Wistert, number 5. All right, guys, we'll wrap up this edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, OTAs are officially underway. The Eagles have the helmets on. They are practicing, getting ready for a potential repeat run in 2025. Kevin Patullo, the Eagles' new play caller and offensive coordinator, he said some interesting things today about finding a balance between being creative and evolving on offense, but also doing what you do best. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. You know, I was talking about Kevin Patullo yesterday, and it was interesting listening to him talk to the media today, his first press conference since taking over as the new offensive coordinator and play caller, replacing Kellen Moore, who's now the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. It was interesting listening to him talk today about philosophies and how the offense could be different compared to the 2024 championship season. And it was interesting when he was asked about how the offense could be different, he kind of changed the point and talked more about how they want to maybe not be different on offense, but they want to do things that, simply put, players do best. He wants to put his players in the best position to succeed. He wants to maximize their strengths, which I personally love hearing that because I've said it on the show before, I can't stand coaches that say, this is my scheme, you're going to mold around my scheme. Like, you're going to conform to what I want in an offense or a defense, whether that fits your traits or not, whether that gets the most out of you, if that maximizes your potential or not. This is what I do. It's my way or the highway. Chip Kelly vibes. I can't stand that kind of coach. I like a player's coach that says, what do my players do best? Okay, I will now evolve my scheme around my personnel. Like, I think that's the best kind of coaching. That's how Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl. I think that's how Nick Sirianni won a Super Bowl. That's how Andy Reid had so much success in Philadelphia, now in Kansas City. I feel like that's the best way to approach coaching, especially on offense, especially as a play caller. So I agree with that sentiment. And I do think, even though yesterday I talked about the need to evolve on offense, and A.J. Brown has said this too, because not evolving on offense and thinking you're just going to run it back and do the same things as the year before, even if you won a Super Bowl, thinking that's going to work is a mistake. The 2018 Eagles tried that, it didn't work. The 2023 Eagles tried that, it didn't work. You can't be vanilla. You got to be multiple. You've got to have answers. You got to be able to adjust at halftime. You got to be able to start fast. You got to be creative. You have to do different things because teams, especially when you're the champ, you're the hunted. You're going to have the target on your back now. So teams are going to adjust to what you do best to try to stop you. So you can't just say, oh, we won. We're the champs. We're going to do that again like we did last year. That gets you into trouble. So for me, like, yeah, there are things I want Patullo to do different this year. I want them to throw more. I want them to be more balanced when it comes to throwing the football versus running. The quick passing game I want to be utilized better. The Eagles have so many great weapons, and the screen game is just so useless and has been so useless for years. How can we not get Saquon the ball better in the open field in the screen game, or Dallas Goedert or A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith? Like, these swing screens to Jahan Dotson last year were just so useless, to Devontae Smith where you have one receiver blocking in front of him. You know, like, those are things I definitely want to see different this year on offense. I want to see Patullo keep the balance of Kellen Moore type of things on offense, under center, play action rollouts, but also Nick Sirianni stuff. I want to see them stretch the field a little bit more this year. So yes, you got to evolve. You got to be creative. You got to be different year after year. Always add on to things. But at the same time, Patullo talking about that today, about, you know, doing what his players do best, that did get me thinking a little bit more about this topic, about what the offense should look like. And I do agree with him. There has to be a balance between being new, fresh, and creative and evolving, but also again, doing what your team does best and sticking to your identity, because I do think in years past as well, the Eagles have gotten into trouble when they're trying to be something they're not. If you look at the beginning of the 2021 season, they wanted to see what they had in Jalen Hurts as a franchise quarterback, so they threw the football a lot, and he wasn't ready for that. They were a run-first football team. When they committed to that approach, they ended up winning 7 of their last 9 games and made the playoffs in Nick Sirianni's first year. 2024, yet again, I think they tried to be a pass-first offense in the beginning of the year. That's not who they were. They embraced the identity of being a run-first team led by Saquon Barkley, and they won a Super Bowl as a result. So, yeah, again, you want to do different things. You want to be multiple on offense, and you want to be able to win in every single way, because each game is going to call for something different to win a football game. Teams adjust to what you're trying to do, especially as the champ. But I totally agree with what Patullo is saying. You want to mold the offense to the strengths of the strengths of your players. You want to do what you do best, right? And what the Eagles do best, a lot of the times, is pretty simple. The Eagles have never really been a complex offense in this Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts era. And defenses know what's coming a lot of the time, but the Eagles are so talented that they just out-execute you. So, again, there's a balance. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to do what you do best. You want to keep your identity. I don't want to suddenly this year be throwing the football 40 times a game. Saquon Barkley should still be the face of your offense. But at the same time, yeah, Patullo needs to find more of a balance throwing the football. He needs to have his own vision. He can't just run back the same offense as last year. I want to see the quick passing game used better, the middle of the field used better, the screen game used better. It's all about balance, I think. I think you got to be new and evolve, but do it by finding ways to maximize your player strengths. You can have your cake and eat it too. Use your identity, but find new ways to show off that identity. I'm fascinated to see what this offense is going to look like. I don't think it's going to be all that different from last year, but just the little nuances, different things that Patullo is going to do compared to Kellen Moore. I'm really interested to see the context of that, like what that's going to look like on the football field. And we're not going to know until the regular season. They're not going to show you that in training camp. They're certainly not going to show you that in the preseason. So we've got months still to see that and figure it out. But Patullo talking about that today was, I think, really fascinating. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is our Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with our guys Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, getting you ready for the 2025 NFL season, which, believe it or not, is only 99 days away. 99 days, the Eagles will kick things off at the Link against the Dallas Cowboys. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.